When the noise of the world fades and every familiar voice goes silent. When the hands that once held you let go. When the doors you trusted close without warning. That is the moment a man discovers what he truly stands on. Not his title, not his money, not his reputation, not the applause of people, but the unseen strength of the God who never leaves. There comes a season in every life when the crowd disappears, the support dries up, and the road narrows until only one footprint remains beside yours. It is not abandonment, it is invitation. It is the sacred moment when a man has no one but God and discovers that God is more than enough. Picture a man who once walked surrounded by laughter, opportunity, and promise. His phone buzzed with messages. His table was full of friends. His plans were filled with confidence. He believed his strength came from connections, from skill, from what he could control. Then life shifted. A decision went wrong. A relationship collapsed. A door he counted on slammed shut. The crowd slowly drifted away. One by one, voices grew silent. One by one, hands stopped reaching back. Suddenly, the room that once echoed with noise became painfully quiet. And in that silence, fear tried to speak louder than faith. When isolation enters a man's life, the first instinct is often panic. The mind immediately interprets silence as rejection, empty rooms as abandonment, and distance as proof that something has gone wrong. The heart begins to ask painful questions. Why did everyone leave? What did I lose? What did I do wrong? Yet the deepest truth hidden inside this season is that isolation is not God turning away. It is God drawing closer. When the noise fades and the crowd disappears, God is not absent. He is creating sacred space for intimacy, clarity, and transformation. What feels like loneliness on the surface is often divine invitation underneath. There are moments in life when God intentionally allows familiar supports to fall away, not because he wants to punish, but because he wants to realign. Human connections, comfort zones, routines, and even personal strengths can quietly become substitutes for trust in God. Without realizing it, a man may begin leaning more on people as approval than on God's direction, more on stability than on faith, more on control than on surrender. Isolation strips away these false anchors. It exposes what the heart truly depends on. When there's no one left to lean on, the soul finally learns how to lean fully on God. Isolation also silences distractions that normally drown out God's voice. In busy seasons, life moves fast, and spiritual sensitivity often grows dull. Noise fills the mind, responsibilities consume attention, and the heart rarely sits still long enough to listen. But when isolation comes, the volume of the world turns down. The quiet becomes uncomfortable at first because it forces a man to face himself, his fears, regrets, wounds, and questions. Yet it is precisely in this quiet that God begins speaking with clarity. The voice that was once drowned out by chaos becomes audible in stillness. What once felt empty begins to feel holy. Many men fear isolation because it confronts identity. Without crowds, titles, routines, or applause, a man must face who he truly is. There is no audience to impress and no mask to hide behind. Weaknesses surface. Insecurity has become visible. Old wounds reappear. This exposure can feel threatening, but it is actually healing. God does his deepest restorative work in environments where honesty is unavoidable. In isolation, a man learns to stop performing and start becoming. He learns that his worth is not measured by productivity, popularity, or approval, but by the steady love of God that does not fluctuate with circumstances. Isolation also creates dependence. Where help is limited and answers are delayed, prayer becomes more than a habit. It becomes oxygen. Conversations with God become raw and sincere. The man no longer prays to impress heaven. He prays because he truly needs heaven. Tears become language. Silence becomes worship. Waiting becomes trust. In this dependency, faith grows roots instead of wings. It stops floating on emotion and starts anchoring in conviction. God becomes not just someone he believes in, but someone he experiences daily. What many people label as abandonment is often preparation. Before God elevates a man, he often isolates him. Before God expands influence, he deepens character. Before God entrusts impact, he refines obedience. Solitude becomes the classroom where patience is learned, humility is cultivated, discipline is strengthened, and listening is sharpened. A man who has learned to stand alone with God will not collapse when surrounded by pressure later. Isolation builds internal stability that public success can never produce. In isolation, motives also become clear. When no one is watching, cheering, or rewarding effort, the heart must confront why it does what it does. Does obedience remain when recognition disappears? Does faith remain when comfort disappears? Does integrity remain when convenience disappears? These questions reshape character at the deepest level. God is less concerned with external performance and more concerned with internal alignment. Isolation exposes what truly drives a man. Another powerful transformation in isolation is learning contentment. A man learns how to live without constant stimulation, validation, or reassurance. He learns to find peace in simplicity, joy in stillness, and strength in quiet trust. This kind of contentment cannot be manufactured. It is cultivated through surrender. It teaches the soul that God's presence alone is enough to sustain life, purpose, and hope. Over time, the pain of isolation begins to soften into peace. The emptiness becomes space for God's presence. The silence becomes a sanctuary. The loneliness becomes intimacy. The man begins to recognize that God has been closer than he ever imagined. What once felt like loss becomes gratitude. What once felt like delay becomes wisdom. What once felt like weakness becomes strength. Isolation changes the way a man walks back into the world. He no longer clings to people for identity. He no longer fears being alone because he has learned how to stand with God. He no longer measures success by noise or visibility, but by faithfulness and peace. He carries inner stability that cannot be shaken by external instability. The season that once felt like abandonment becomes the foundation for lifelong spiritual strength. In the end, isolation is not a prison, it is a doorway. It leads a man away from shallow dependence and into deep trust. It removes what is temporary so what is eternal can take root. It teaches the soul that even when everything else fades, God remains steady, faithful, and near. And once a man learns this truth, he never fears being alone again, because he knows he is never truly alone when God is present. When everything around a man is stable, it is easy to believe he is strong. When his bank account is healthy, when relationships are intact, when opportunities are flowing, and when people are affirming his worth, confidence feels natural. Strength appears visible, tangible, measurable. But much of what looks like strength in comfortable seasons is actually borrowed support. It is reinforcement from systems, people, routines, and resources that quietly hold a man upright without him realizing it. True strength is rarely revealed in abundance. It is revealed when those supports are removed and the soul must stand on what truly sustains it. False support creates a dangerous illusion of control. A man begins to trust what he can manage instead of who God is. He may believe his intelligence, network, talent, or position will always protect him. Over time, dependence shifts subtly from faith to familiarity, not because he intentionally abandons God, but because comfort dulls urgency. When everything works smoothly, prayer becomes optional instead of necessary. Humility becomes selective instead of constant. And surrender becomes partial instead of complete. The heart begins to lean on what is visible rather than what is eternal. Then life disrupts the illusion. A door closes unexpectedly. A relationship breaks down. A financial strain appears. A dream collapses. A health scare awakens fear. Suddenly the scaffolding that once supported confidence is gone. The man feels exposed, vulnerable, unsure. This is often the moment when panic tries to take control. He may feel weaker than he ever has before, but in reality, he is finally seeing himself. Honestly, the removal of false support reveals the foundation that truly exists beneath the surface. What feels like weakness in these moments is actually clarity. When a man can no longer lean on what once stabilized him, he discovers whether his faith is functional or merely theoretical. He learns whether God is someone he talks about or someone he truly trusts. He learns whether obedience is rooted in convenience or conviction. The stripping process may feel uncomfortable, even painful, but it is deeply necessary for spiritual maturity. True strength does not announce itself loudly. It does not demand recognition. It does not depend on circumstances. It is quiet, rooted, resilient. It shows up when fear does not control decisions, when integrity remains intact under pressure, when hope continues despite uncertainty, when peace survives chaos. This kind of strength cannot be developed while leaning heavily on external supports. It is forged when the soul must rely directly on God for stability, guidance, and endurance. When false support is removed, prayer changes. It becomes less about routine and more about survival. The man no longer prays because he should. He prays because he must. His conversations with God deepen. His listening sharpens. His trust stretches. He learns to wait instead of forcing outcomes. He learns to surrender instead of controlling situations. He learns to rest instead of striving. These internal shifts mark the emergence of genuine strength. There's also a humbling effect when supports fall away. Pride often hides behind success, productivity, and approval. A man may unconsciously measure his value by achievements, influence, or independence. When these props disappear, humility grows naturally. He recognizes his limitations. He acknowledges his need for grace. He becomes teachable again. This humility does not weaken him. It strengthens him by aligning his heart with truth. The absence of false support also clarifies priorities. What once seemed important may suddenly feel empty. What once consumed energy may no longer satisfy. A man begins to reassess how he invests his time, attention, and loyalty. He learns to value depth over image, obedience over popularity, faithfulness over visibility. This clarity strengthens decision-making and anchors purpose emotionally. This season teaches resilience. When comfort is removed, the nervous system learns how to regulate without constant reassurance. The heart learns how to endure disappointment without collapsing. The mind learns how to remain steady under uncertainty. Resilience is not emotional numbness. It is emotional stability anchored in trust. It allows a man to move forward without being controlled by fear, anger, or insecurity. Spiritually, strength deepens because faith becomes experiential rather than conceptual. A man does not merely believe God can provide. He watches God sustain him when nothing else does. He does not merely believe God brings peace. He feels peace settle in the middle of chaos. He does not merely believe God directs paths. He experiences divine guidance when options are limited. These lived encounters build unshakable confidence. Over time, the man notices a shift in how he responds to pressure. Situations that once triggered anxiety now awaken prayer. Uncertainty that once produced panic now invites patience. Challenges that once felt overwhelming now feel manageable because his internal foundation has strengthened. He is no longer easily shaken by changes in environment because his stability comes from within, not around him. When life eventually restores opportunities, relationships, and resources, the man carries them differently. He no longer depends on them for identity or security. He holds them with gratitude rather than attachment. He enjoys them without worshiping them. He can lose them without losing himself. This is the mark of true strength. Freedom from dependency on anything other than God. The removal of false support is not cruelty, it is kindness. It protects a man from building his life on unstable foundations that would eventually collapse anyway. It redirects his trust toward what cannot fail. It prepares him to handle future responsibility without being corrupted by it. It strengthens his inner world so that his outer world can expand safely. In the end, true strength is not how much a man can carry. It is how deeply he can trust. It is not how many supports surround him. It is how firmly he stands when those supports disappear. And when a man learns to stand with God alone, he becomes stronger than he ever was when surrounded by everything else. There comes a moment in every broken season when words stop working. Polished prayers feel empty. Religious language feels distant. The heart grows tired of repeating phrases that no longer carry weight. Pain has a way of stripping language down to its rawest form. In that place, prayer stops being about structure and starts becoming about survival. Broken prayers are not pretty. They are not organized. They are not confident. They are messy, emotional, trembling, and sometimes silent. Yet these are the prayers that open the deepest door to transformation because they come from a heart that is no longer hiding. When a man reaches the end of his own strength, honesty becomes unavoidable. There is no energy left to impress God, no patience left to pretend everything is fine, no motivation left to perform spiritually. What remains is truth. Anger may surface, confusion may spill out, tears may interrupt sentences, questions may sound uncomfortable, regret may finally be confessed, fear may finally be admitted. These expressions are not signs of weak faith. They are signs of real faith awakening. God does not fear honesty. He welcomes it. He responds to sincerity far more than to perfection. Broken prayers create space for healing because they expose wounds that have been hidden for years, many and carry unresolved pain silently. Rejection, shame, disappointment, betrayal, failure, unmet expectation. These wounds often stay buried beneath activity, success, or distraction. But when life slows down and pressure increases, the cracks open. Broken prayers allow those wounds to surface in God's presence instead of festering in isolation. Healing cannot begin where truth is concealed. Transformation requires vulnerability. There's a sacred exchange. That happens when a man brings his brokenness openly before God. He releases control. He surrenders image. He lets go of the illusion that he must be strong all the time. In that surrender, God meets him with grace instead of judgment, patience instead of disappointment, and compassion instead of condemnation. The man begins to realize that God's love is not earned by performance, is received through surrender. Broken prayers also deepen intimacy. Relationships grow stronger through honesty, not perfection. The same is true with God. When a man speaks from the deepest parts of his heart, connection becomes personal rather than distant. Prayer shifts from ritual to relationship. God is no longer approached as a distant authority figure, but experienced as a present companion who listens, understands, and walks alongside pain. Trust deepens because the man experiences God not only in victories, but in vulnerability. Another powerful effect of broken prayers is clarity. When emotions are released honestly, the soul becomes lighter. Confusion begins to untangle. The noise inside the mind quiets. Perspective slowly returns. The man may not receive immediate answers, but he receives peace that allows him to breathe again. This peace does not erase the problem. It stabilizes the heart, so the problem no longer controls the spirit. Broken prayers also rewire expectation. A man learns that prayer is not a transaction, but a transformation. It is not about controlling outcomes, but aligning the heart. Instead of demanding immediate solutions, he learns to trust God's timing. Instead of forcing understanding, he learns to rest in mystery. Instead of chasing comfort, he learns to pursue growth. His faith matures because it is no longer dependent on quick fixes. There's courage in broken prayers. It takes strength to admit weakness. It takes humility to confess failure. It takes faith to bring unanswered questions to God instead of walking away. This courage builds spiritual resilience. A man who learns to pray honestly will not collapse when future storms arise. He knows where to run with his pain. He knows how to release burdens instead of carrying them alone. He knows how to reconnect with God when emotions become heavy. Broken prayers also soften the heart. Pride melts. Defensiveness weakens. Compassion grows. The man becomes more patient with others because he has encountered grace personally. He becomes more understanding of struggle because he has walked through his own. His character deepens, not through success, but through surrender. Silence often becomes part of broken prayer. There are moments when words fail completely, when the heart can only sit quietly in God's presence. This silence is not emptiness, it is trust resting. It is the soul learning how to be still without needing answers. It is worship beyond language. In these moments, God's presence becomes more real than explanation. Over time, the man notices that his inner world begins to shift. Anxiety decreases. Shame loosens its grip. Fear loses authority. Hope quietly returns. Strength rebuilds from the inside out. The circumstances may remain difficult, but the man is no longer the same person facing them. He is steadier, calmer, more grounded, more trusting. Broken prayers teach a man that God is not intimidated by his mess. God is not waiting for him to clean himself up before approaching. God meets him exactly where he is. This realization changes how he lives. He no longer hides from God during struggle. He runs toward God. He no longer suppresses emotions. He surrenders them. He no longer pretends to be strong. He allows God to become his strength. In the end, broken prayers do not weaken faith. They purify it. They remove performance and replace it with authenticity. They remove fear and replace it with trust. They remove isolation and replace it with intimacy. They transform the heart, not by changing circumstances first, but by changing perspective, identity, and reliance. A man who Leah, RNS to pray from brokenness, discovers a deeper, stronger, more resilient faith than he ever knew before. Lonely seasons often feel unproductive on the surface. There's no visible progress, no public recognition, no measurable achievement. Days can feel repetitive, quiet, and slow. The mind may whisper that life is being wasted, that momentum has been lost, that nothing meaningful is happening. Yet beneath the silence, something powerful is taking place. God frequently uses solitude as a training ground, shaping the inner life of a man long before shaping the outer results of his life. What appears empty is actually full of preparation. In solitude, distractions are removed so focus can sharpen. Without constant noise, obligations, and expectations pulling attention in every direction, a man finally has space to reflect, examine, and listen. He begins to notice patterns in his thinking, habits in his behavior, motivations in his heart that were previously hidden beneath busyness. This awareness becomes the starting point for growth. A man cannot change what he refuses to see. Solitude provides clarity that crowded environments rarely allow. Character is refined in quiet places. Patience develops when there is no rush. Discipline grows when no one is watching. Integrity strengthens when choices are made without external pressure or reward. Faith deepens when obedience is practiced privately rather than publicly. These qualities are not glamorous, but they are found at, without them, success becomes unstable and influence becomes dangerous. God often prioritizes who a man becomes over what a man accomplishes. Lonely seasons also teach emotional maturity. When external stimulation decreases, internal emotions surface more clearly. Feelings that were buried under activity, grief, disappointment, insecurity, fear begin to emerge. Instead of escaping these emotions, solitude invites a man to process them honestly. He learns how to sit with discomfort without being controlled by it. He learns how to regulate his reactions instead of reacting impulsively. Emotional stability becomes part of his training. Spiritually, solitude deepens sensitivity to God's presence. Without constant noise competing for attention, a man learns how to recognize subtle guidance, quiet conviction, and gentle reassurance. He becomes more attentive to the inner movements of faith. Prayer becomes more conversational, reflective, and sincere. Scripture becomes more personal. Worship becomes more intimate. God shifts from being an occasional influence to a daily companion. Lonely seasons also dismantle ego. When applause disappears and visibility decreases, the craving for recognition loses power. A man learns to serve without being seen, obey without being affirmed, and remain faithful without being celebrated. This humility protects him from pride later when influence increases. It grounds his identity in purpose rather than popularity. Decision-making become. As wiser in solitude without external pressure, opinions, or expectations clouding judgment, clarity increases. A man begins to understand what truly matters to him and what aligns with his values. He becomes less reactive and more intentional. He learns to wait before acting, to listen before responding, and to seek wisdom rather than rushing outcomes. These habits shape leadership maturity and life stability. Lonely seasons strengthen endurance. When progress feels slow and answers feel delayed, perseverance develops. A man learns how to remain consistent even when motivation fades. He learns how to trust the process instead of demanding immediate results. He learns how to remain faithful in small things, unseen efforts, and quiet obedience. This endurance becomes essential for future responsibility. There's also a spiritual purification that happens in solitude. Desires are refined. Attachments are questioned. Priorities are reordered. A man learns what truly satisfies his soul and what merely distracts it. He becomes more selective about what he allows to influence his mind, habits, and emotions. This purification creates inner alignment and long-term stability. Lonely seasons create leaders who are anchored rather than fragile. They produce individuals who are not easily shaken by criticism, pressure, or uncertainty. A man who has learned how to stand steady in quiet seasons will not collapse in loud ones. He will not be driven by approval or threatened by opposition. His confidence will come from internal conviction rather than external validation. Even creativity and vision are often sharpened in solitude. Without constant stimulation, the mind becomes more reflective and imaginative. Ideas mature, dreams gain clarity, purpose becomes more defined. Many breakthroughs are conceived in isolation long before they are expressed publicly. Lonely seasons also teach gratitude. Simple things begin to carry deeper meaning: a peaceful morning, a meaningful conversation, a quiet prayer, a moment of clarity. The heart learns to appreciate what is present rather than constantly chasing what is missing. Gratitude stabilizes emotional health and deepens contentment. Over time, the man begins to recognize that solitude has been shaping him quietly but powerfully. He becomes calmer, more patient, more self-aware, more spiritually grounded, more emotionally balanced. The growth may not have been visible to others, but it has been profound within him. When life eventually opens new doors, he walks through them differently. He carries humility instead of entitlement. He carries discipline instead of impulsiveness. He carries wisdom instead of recklessness. He carries peace instead of anxiety. The lonely season did not delay his destiny. It prepared him for it. In the end, solitude is not punishment. It is preparation. It is God investing deeply in the foundation of a man's life so that whatever is built later can stand strong. What felt like isolate, iron becomes the very place where strength, clarity, maturity, and faith were forged. Whenever familiar is removed and a man finds himself standing with nothing but God, faith can no longer remain secondhand. It can no longer rely on what parents believed, what friends confessed, what a church taught, or what culture reinforced. In that isolated place, belief becomes intensely personal. The man must decide for himself whether God is real to him, whether trust is genuine, whether obedience is sincere. Faith moves from being inherited information to lived experience, and that transition changes everything. In seasons of comfort, it is easy to lean on collective belief. A man may draw strength from community worship, shared traditions, inspirational messages, and spiritual routines. These supports are valuable, but they can quietly substitute for personal encounter. Faith can exist without deep ownership, when others are carrying part of the spiritual weight. But when a man has no one but God, there is no spiritual echo to lean on. Silence forces him to engage God directly. He must pray when no one reminds him. He must believe when no one encourages him. He must trust when no one explains what is happening. This independence deepens authenticity. Personal faith is built through experience rather than theory. A man begins to recognize God's faithfulness not because someone told him, but because he lived through moments where God sustained him emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. He sees how peace arrives unexpectedly in chaos. He notices guidance unfolding when decisions feel uncertain. He experiences strength when his own strength fails. These moments anchor belief far deeper than intellectual agreement ever could. Faith becomes relational, not merely conceptual. When faith becomes personal, the man's understanding of God matures. God is no longer just a distant figure in stories, teachings, or doctrines. God becomes present in daily life, in quiet thoughts, in subtle convictions, in small victories, and in silent endurance. The man learns to listen instead of only speaking in prayer. He learns to trust intuition shaped by spiritual discernment. He becomes sensitive to internal nudges, peace, restraint, and wisdom that guide his decisions. Personal faith also reshapes responsibility. A man realizes that he cannot borrow conviction from others forever. He must choose integrity when no one is watching. He must remain faithful when no one affirms him. He must hold on to hope when no one explains the timeline. This accountability strengthens character because choices are driven by inner alignment rather than external pressure. The man becomes internally governed instead of externally managed. As faith deepens personally, fear loses dominance. Confidence no longer depends on favorable circumstances or group reinforcement. The man becomes calmer in uncertainty because his trust is anchored internally. He learns how to navigate anxiety through GH prayer rather than avoidance. He learns how to face disappointment without collapsing emotionally. He learns how to maintain perspective during delay. These emotional shifts reveal the maturity of personal faith. Personal faith also brings clarity of identity. A man stops defining himself primarily by roles, achievements, or opinions. He begins to understand himself through his relationship with God. Worth becomes rooted in purpose rather than performance. Security becomes anchored in belonging rather than approval. This identity stability protects him from comparison, jealousy, and insecurity. When faith is personal, worship becomes sincere rather than performative. The man no longer worships to impress others or to match a crowd's energy. He worships from gratitude, reverence, and intimacy. Prayer becomes dialogue rather than ritual. Obedience becomes desire rather than obligation. Spiritual disciplines become nourishment rather than duty. Personal faith also sharpens discernment. A man becomes more cautious about influences that shape his thinking, habits, and values. He becomes intentional about what he consumes mentally and emotionally. He becomes selective about relationships that align with his growth. This discernment protects spiritual health and emotional stability. Another transformation occurs in how the man handles doubt. Instead of suppressing questions or avoiding tension, he brings doubts honestly to God. He learns that faith is not the absence of quest, but the willingness to seek truth with humility. This honesty strengthens belief rather than weakening it. It builds trust in God's patience and guidance. As personal faith matures, the man's relationship with others improves. He becomes less dependent on approval and less threatened by disagreement. He can love freely without needing validation. He can serve without expecting recognition. He can lead without controlling outcomes. His relationships become healthier because his identity is anchored internally rather than externally. Personal faith also produces quiet confidence. Not arrogance, but stability. The man becomes steady in storms, patient in delays, humble in success, and grounded in change. He is not easily shaken because his belief system is rooted deeply within him rather than borrowed from others. Over time, the man realizes that solitude was not meant to isolate him from faith, but to deepen it. God used silence to build intimacy. God used distance from voices to sharpen spiritual hearing. God used loneliness to cultivate ownership of belief. The season that once felt empty becomes the birthplace of authentic spirituality. In the end, when a man's faith becomes personal, it becomes unbreakable. It is no longer dependent on circumstances, personalities, or environments. It travels with him wherever he goes. It sustains him in every season. It shapes every decision. And this kind of faith transforms not only how he believes, but how he lives. Waiting is one of the hardest disciplines for the human heart. In a world driven by speed, efficiency, and instant results, delay often feels like failure. When answers do not come quickly, when progress seems slow, when doors remain closed longer than expected, frustration begins to rise. The mind starts questioning purpose, timing, and worth. Yet waiting is not wasted time in God's process. Waiting is the workshop where inner strength, patience, humility, and trust are quietly built. When a man is forced to wait, his true posture is revealed. Impatience exposes a desire for control. Anxiety reveals fear of uncertainty. Frustration exposes attachment to outcomes. Waiting confronts these internal tensions. It brings to the surface what normally stays hidden under activity. Instead of escaping discomfort, the waiting season invites a man to confront his emotional responses honestly and allow God to reshape them. Waiting teaches surrender. A man learns that not everything can be forced, accelerated, or manipulated. He discovers the limits of his influence. He realizes that some doors open only by divine timing, not human effort. This realization humbles the ego and softens the heart. Control gradually gives way to trust. Striving slowly transforms into resting. The soul learns how to breathe without panic when outcomes remain uncertain. Patience develops not through convenience, but through endurance. Every delayed answer strengthens emotional regulation. Every postponed breakthrough strengthens self-discipline. Every quiet day strengthens consistency. A man learns how to remain faithful in small actions when big changes are not visible. He learns how to keep showing up without applause, how to remain committed without immediate reward, how to stay hopeful without constant reassurance. This endurance forms stability that lasts beyond the waiting season. Waiting also purifies motivation. When progress slows and recognition fades, the heart must confront why it is pursuing certain goals. Is it for validation, security, comfort, or purpose? Waiting strips away superficial motives and exposes deeper intentions. A man learns to pursue alignment rather than approval, growth rather than image, obedience rather than reward. This purification protects him from building success on unhealthy foundations. Emotionally, waiting strengthens resilience. A man learns how to manage disappointment without losing direction. He learns how to regulate frustration without becoming bitter. He learns how to handle uncertainty without collapsing into fear. These emotional skills increase long-term mental health and relational stability. Waiting stretches emotional capacity and teaches the nervous system how to remain calm under pressure. Waiting deepens spiritual sensitivity. When activity slows, awareness increases. A man becomes more attentive to subtle guidance, internal peace, quiet conviction, and intuitive wisdom. He learns to listen rather than rush. He learns to observe rather than react. He learns to discern timing rather than push momentum. Spiritual maturity often grows faster in stillness than in busyness. Waiting also strengthens gratitude. When progress is slow, small blessings become more visible. A man learns to appreciate what is present rather than obsess over what is missing. Gratitude shifts perspective from scarcity to sufficiency. It stabilizes emotional health and strengthens contentment. The heart becomes less restless and more grounded. Another important lesson in waiting is trust in process. A man learns that growth often happens beneath the surface before it becomes visible externally. Roots grow before fruit appears. Strength develops internally before responsibility expands externally. Waiting teaches respect for timing and sequence. It builds confidence that unseen progress is still meaningful progress. Waiting reshapes decision-making. A man becomes less impulsive and more thoughtful. He learns how to pause before reacting, reflect before responding, and seek wisdom before acting. This patience prevents costly mistakes driven by urgency or fear. It strengthens leadership capacity and emotional intelligence. Waiting also teaches humility. A man realizes that he does not control outcomes as much as he once believed. He becomes more open to learning, correction, and guidance. This humility protects him from arrogance when success eventually arrives. It keeps the heart grounded. Spiritually, waiting deepens faith bika. Used belief is exercised without immediate reward. Trust becomes steady rather than conditional. Worship becomes sincere rather than transactional. Prayer becomes relational rather than demanding. The man learns how to remain faithful even when answers are slow. This faith becomes resilient and durable. Over time, the waiting season produces noticeable internal change. Anxiety softens. Confidence stabilizes. Discipline strengthens. Perspective matures. Emotional reactions become more measured. Spiritual awareness deepens. The man becomes calmer, wiser, and more grounded. When breakthroughs finally come, the man carries them differently. He no longer rushes recklessly. He no longer grasps anxiously. He stewards opportunities with patience and wisdom. He appreciates progress without idolizing it. He remains balanced because his identity is no longer dependent on speed or success. Waiting teaches a man how to live with peace in uncertainty, how to trust without control, how to remain faithful without visible reward, and how to grow without constant stimulation. It builds inner strength that no shortcut can produce. In the end, waiting is not delay, it is development. It is God shaping the inner life so the outer life can sustain what is coming. Patience, humility, endurance, trust, gratitude, and emotional stability are quietly forged in the waiting room of life. And a man who has learned how to wait well carries strength that lasts, far beyond the season itself. Healing rarely happens in public moments. It unfolds quietly, deeply, and personally in the hidden spaces of the heart where no one else can see the wounds a man carries. Many men move through life functioning outwardly while bleeding inwardly. They learn how to perform, succeed, and survive while silently carrying pain from rejection, betrayal, failure, shame, disappointment, and unmet expectation. These wounds do not disappear simply because time passes or circumstances improve. They remain stored in memory, emotions, and identity until they are intentionally addressed. Hidden places are where real restoration begins. When life slows down and external noise fades, internal pain becomes more noticeable. Silence brings buried emotions to the surface. A man may suddenly feel sadness he never processed, anger he suppressed, fear he ignored, or regret he avoided. This surfacing can feel uncomfortable and even overwhelming, but it is necessary. Pain that remains buried often leaks into behavior, relationships, and decision-making in unhealthy ways. Healing requires awareness before transformation can occur. In the hidden places, honesty becomes unavoidable. Without the pressure to perform or impress, a man can finally admit what hurts, what scares him, and what still affects him emotionally. He can acknowledge past disappointments, broken trust, missed opportunities, childhood wounds, and personal failures. This honesty is not weakness. It is courage. Facing pain directly requires angst. Avoiding it only prolongs its influence. Healing in hidden places also involves surrendering control. Many men attempt to manage pain through distraction, achievement, self-protection, or emotional shutdown. These coping mechanisms may provide temporary relief, but rarely produce lasting healing. In quiet surrender, a man allows God to access areas he once guarded tightly. He allows truth to replace denial. He allows grace to replace shame. He allows peace to replace fear. This surrender opens the door for deep restoration. Forgiveness often emerges in hidden places. Unresolved bitterness can quietly shape personality, trust levels, and emotional availability. When a man sits honestly with God, old resentments surface naturally. Healing invites the difficult but freeing process of releasing past offenses, unmet expectations, and personal regrets. Forgiveness does not excuse harm. It releases the heart from carrying its weight. This emotional release restores inner freedom. Healing also reshapes identity. Pain often distorts self-perception. A man may begin to define himself by failure, rejection, or weakness. Hidden healing replaces false identity with truth. Worth becomes anchored in purpose rather than past mistakes. Confidence rebuilds gradually. Self-respect strengthens. The man begins to see himself with clarity rather than condemnation. Emotional regulation improves as healing deepens. Triggers lose intensity. Reactions become calmer. Patterns of defensiveness. Withdrawal or aggression soften. The nervous system learns safety again. The man becomes more present in relationships, more patient in conflict, and more stable under pressure. This emotional maturity improves every area of life. Healing in hidden places also strengthens spiritual connection. A man experiences God not only as a provider or guide, but as a healer and comforter. Trust deepens because God meets him in vulnerability rather than performance. Prayer becomes more honest. Worship becomes more heartfelt. Faith becomes relational rather than mechanical. Another powerful outcome of hidden healing is restored capacity to love and trust. Unhealed wounds often create emotional walls that protect but also isolate. As healing progresses, those walls slowly come down. A man becomes more open, compassionate, and emotionally available. He can connect without fear dominating his interactions. Relationships become healthier because the past no longer controls the present. Hidden healing also improves decision-making. When emotional pain no longer drives behavior, choices become clearer and more intentional. A man is less likely to sabotage opportunities, repeat unhealthy patterns, or avoid responsibility. He becomes more aligned with wisdom rather than impulse or fear. Healing is rarely instant. It unfolds gradually through reflection, prayer, honesty, forgiveness, and patience. Some wounds heal quickly. Others require time, repetition, and grace. Progress may be subtle, but it is meaningful. Small emotional shifts accumulate into lasting transformation. As healing deepens, the man begins to notice increased peace. The mind feels quieter. The heart feels lighter. The body feels less tense. Sleep improves. Anxiety decreases. Joy becomes more accessible. These internal changes signal restoration at work. Healing also creates compassion for others. A man who has faced his own pain becomes more empathetic toward the struggles of others. Judgment softens. Patience grows. Grace flows more freely. This compassion strengthens leadership, friendship, and family relationship. The hidden work of healing prepares a man for a healthier success. Without emotional restoration, achievement often magnifies unresolved pain. With healing, success becomes balanced, grounded, and sustainable. Influence becomes safe. Responsibility becomes manageable. Relationships remain intact. Hidden healing protects future generations. Emotional patterns often repeat unless they are intentionally interrupted. A healed man passes on stability instead of dysfunction, wisdom instead of wounds, peace instead of fear. In the end, healing in hidden places restores wholeness. It reconnects fragmented parts of the soul. It strengthens emotional resilience. It renews spiritual trust. It liberates identity. It opens the heart to love, peace, and purpose again. What happens quietly within a man often shapes the greatest visible transformation in his life. When a man builds his life on unstable foundations, everything feels secure only as long as circumstances cooperate. People's approval, financial stability, career success, physical strength, and personal influence can create the illusion of safety. But these things are fragile by nature. They change, fade, disappoint, and sometimes disappear without warning. When life shakes, anything built on temporary ground begins to crack. True stability is not found in what a man possesses or controls, but in what anchors him. When control disappears, when God becomes the foundation, life becomes unshakable. A foundation determines how a structure responds to pressure. If the base is shallow, cracks appear quickly under stress. If the base is deep and solid, storms can rage without destroying what stands above it. In the same way, a man's inner foundation shapes how he responds to loss, delay, conflict, disappointment, and uncertainty. When God is the foundation, emotional reactions become steadier, decisions become wiser, and perspective remains anchored even when circumstances fluctuate. An unshakable life does not mean a problem-free life. It means a stable inner world, regardless of external chaos. A man rooted in God still faces storms, but he does not collapse under them. Fear does not dominate his thinking. Anger does not control his reactions. Anxiety does not dictate his choices. He remains grounded because his security comes from something eternal rather than temporary. When God becomes the foundation, identity stabilizes. A man no longer defines himself primarily by success, failure, relationships, or reputation. He understands his worth as rooted in purpose and belonging rather than performance. This identity security protects him from comparison, jealousy, insecurity, and fear of rejection. He can celebrate others without feeling threatened. He can accept correction without defensiveness. He can walk confidently without arrogance. Trust deepens when God becomes the foundation. Instead of panicking when outcomes are uncertain, the man leans into faith. He understands that not everything must make sense immediately in order to remain meaningful. He learns to release control and embrace guidance. This trust creates peace even in unresolved situations. Emotional stability strengthens as the foundation deepens. A man becomes less reactive and more reflective. He learns how to pause before responding. He manages stress with wisdom rather than impulse. He processes disappointment without bitterness. He handles conflict without escalation. These emotional skills improve relationships, leadership, and personal heal. Decision-making becomes clear when the foundation is secure. Instead of chasing short-term comfort or approval, the man prioritizes alignment, integrity, and long-term impact. He becomes less impulsive and more intentional. He chooses patience over pressure, wisdom over speed, depth over appearance. This clarity produces consistent growth. When God is the foundation, success is handled responsibly. Achievement does not inflate ego or distort values. Influence does not compromise humility. Resources do not control identity. A man can enjoy blessings without becoming enslaved by them. He remains grateful rather than entitled. He remains generous rather than guarded. He remains grounded rather than driven by status. Failure also becomes manageable when the foundation is secure. Mistakes become lessons rather than identity labels. Setbacks become redirection rather than defeat. Disappointment becomes refinement rather than discouragement. The man learns how to recover without shame dominating his self-worth. Resilience strengthens because hope remains anchored. Relationships improve when the foundation is strong. A man no longer places unrealistic expectations on people to provide security, validation, or identity. He loves freely without dependency. He communicates honestly without fear of abandonment. He establishes healthy boundaries without guilt. His relationships become balanced rather than emotionally draining. An unshakable foundation also produces consistency. A man's values remain stable across seasons. He does not shift character based on convenience or pressure. Integrity remains intact whether he is seen or unseen. Faithfulness becomes habitual rather than situational. This consistency builds trust in personal and professional environments. Peace becomes a defining trait when God is the foundation, not temporary comfort, but deep calm that remains steady through uncertainty. The mind becomes quieter. The heart becomes more settled. Anxiety loses authority. Contentment grows naturally. This peace enhances clarity, creativity, health, and relationships. Purpose becomes clearer as well. A man begins to live intentionally rather than reactively. He understands why he makes certain choices. He aligns daily actions with long-term values. He becomes more disciplined with time, energy, and attention. Purposeful living increases fulfillment and direction. Spiritual maturity deepens when the foundation is secure. Faith becomes steady rather than emotional. Worship becomes sincere rather than conditional. Prayer becomes relational rather than transactional. Obedience becomes joyful rather than forced. Trust becomes durable rather than fragile. An unshakable man becomes a stabilizing presence to others. His calm influences environments. His wisdom supports others. His integrity builds trust. His peace provides reassurance. He becomes someone others feel safe learning from, leaning on, and growing with. When storms come, and they otherwise do, the man stands firm. He may bend, but he does not break. He may feel pressure, but he does not lose direction. He may experience loss, but he does not lose hope. His foundation holds him steady. In the end, when God becomes the foundation, life gains depth, stability, clarity, and peace. The man no longer lives driven by fear, control, or approval. He lives anchored in trust, purpose, and faith. And once a man learns how to build his life on this foundation, nothing in the world can truly shake him.